Hello guys and welcome. Tonight I invite you to join me on a slow, gentle journey across the ancient world. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes and imagine the soft glow of lantern light flickering over old caravan trails. In this calm story, we'll wander together along the real Silk Road. This won't be a hurried trip, but a peaceful, uninterrupted journey through history. A journey you can simply relax and float along with as you drift towards sleep. Before we begin, take a deep breath and let your body sink into the bed. If you enjoy this gentle voyage through time, feel free to support the channel by giving a like or subscribing, but there's no need to worry about that now. Just let your eyes stay closed and your mind wander. All you need to do is listen to my voice as it guides you through distant deserts and over starlit mountains. Now, picture a vast night sky sprinkled with countless stars, stretching over an endless expanse of sand dunes and jagged peaks. Under that sky, there winds a caravan. A long line of camels and travelers moving slowly, ever so slowly, across the serene landscape. The camels' footsteps are muffled in the sand, and the faint jingle of bells attached to their harnesses is the only music in the cool desert air. The travelers carry with them bundles of rare goods, stories of far-off lands, and dreams of profit or pilgrimage. This image will accompany us as we explore the real story of the Silk Road. Not a single road of silk, but a web of many paths connecting east and west for over 1,000 years. Let's begin our journey at the very start of the Silk Road story. It's an ancient evening. More than 2,000 years ago, we find ourselves near the gates of a great city in northern China, the imperial capital of Chang'an. It's the twilight of a warm day, the sun has set, and a gentle dusk has settled. Outside the city's high walls, a small caravan is preparing to depart at first light. By the glow of oil lamps and torches, you can see merchants securing packs on their animals, rolls of silk, bundles of paper, ceramics carefully cushioned in straw, and perhaps a few sacks of spices. Camels snort and shift their weight under the loads, and handlers murmur soothing words to calm them. A horse stamps its hoof impatiently, sensing a long trek ahead. The air carries a mix of scents, the resin of pinewood fires, the sweetness of hay, and a whiff of something exotic, maybe frankincense or dried pepper, hinting at the treasures this caravan will carry. There's a feeling of quiet anticipation. Imagine standing there with those travelers. One of them, a middle-aged Chinese merchant, adjusts his wide-brimmed hat and looks westward beyond the dark outline of the city gates into the unknown. He has never been past the last frontier garrison before, yet tomorrow he will follow an ancient route towards the distant lands of Central Asia. Near him, a young camel driver, perhaps only 17, is chewing on a piece of grass and trying to hide his excitement and nerves. He's grown up hearing stories of the western regions, places with strange names like Fergana, Samarkand, and Persia. In the quiet of this evening, under the first stars, these people don't know exactly what awaits them, but they're ready to set out. Our journey tonight will mirror theirs in a way. We will travel slowly from one scene to the next, unhurried. We'll pause in oasis towns, cross formidable deserts and mountains in our imagination, and visit bustling markets filled with silks, spices, and jewels. We will also meet many fellow travelers from across the ages, humble merchants and bold explorers, pilgrims seeking solace, soldiers, nomads, and even a princess or two. All of them walked the same roads and passes, leaving footprints that have long since blown away, but their memory lingers. The Silk Road, as we call it, was never a single road paved in silk. That name is poetic, a romantic label given much later to what was really a network of trails, paths, and caravan routes. In reality, there were many silk roads, branching like the strands of a web across the vastness of Asia. Some paths ran north through steppes and grasslands, others wove south through high mountain valleys, and others wove south through high mountain valleys, and others meandered through endless deserts, linking oasis to oasis like beads on a string. These routes formed gradually over centuries, driven by trade and curiosity, and often maintained by diplomacy and daring. To truly feel how it all began, let's drift back over 2 millennia to ancient China during the Han Dynasty. It's around the year 138 BCE. China at this time is a powerful empire under Emperor Wu. To the north and west, however, nomadic tribes like the Xiongnu threaten the empire's borders with raids, the Chinese court hears rumors of lands far to the west that might become allies against these nomads, and also of magnificent horses in a place called Daywan, Fergana. Horses said to be larger and faster than any in China. Heavenly horses that sweat blood and can run like the wind. Emperor Wu is intrigued by both the military potential of such horses and the possibility of finding allies to encircle the hostile nomads. So he decides to send an envoy on a mission of exploration and alliance building far beyond the boundaries of known Chinese territory. The man chosen for this daring assignment is Zhang Qian, a young but capable official. Close your eyes and imagine Zhang Qian as he sets out from Chang'an through the city's western gate. It is a bright morning when his expedition departs. He leads a team of perhaps 100 men, armed and provisioned, riding horses and carrying gifts of silk and gold to impress foreign kings. They journey northwest along the Gansu corridor, a narrow strip of arable land flanked by the towering Kilian Mountains to the south and the vast Gobi Desert to the north. This was the natural route out of China, the road of many earlier local traders and nomads. Zhang Qian's expedition is venturing farther than any Chinese envoy recorded before. The journey does not go as planned. Not long after venturing beyond the Great Wall's reaches, Zhang Qian's group is captured by the Xiongnu nomads. For years he is held captive, effectively a prisoner in the steppe. The mission seems failed before it truly began. Yet, Zhang Qian does not give up. After about a decade, he sees an opportunity to escape. Some say he won the trust of a Xiongnu chieftain and fled. Legends vary. With astonishing perseverance, Zhang Qian and a few companions managed to break free and continue westward. Think of what courage and determination that took, to push onward into unknown lands after losing so much time. Finally, Zhang Qian reaches Daywan, the kingdom of Fergana, in what is now the Fergana Valley of Uzbekistan. There, he indeed finds the famous tall horses that Emperor Wu coveted. They are as splendid as the rumors said, powerful, high-spirited steeds, unlike the smaller horses of China. We can imagine him standing at a corral in Daywan, watching these animals toss their heads, their glossy coats shining in the sun. To Zhang Qian, it must have been like glimpsing a treasure that could change his country's fortunes in war. But horses were not the only marvel he encountered. Zhang Qian continues to travel and gather knowledge. He visits or hears news of other lands. Daxia, Bakhtia, in today's Afghanistan, a land where Greek descendants of Alexander the Great's armies have blended with local peoples. Kangju, Sogdiana, around Samarkand, and Anxi, Parthian, Persia. Everywhere he goes, he notes the products: strong horses, fine wool rugs, ivory, spices, wines, and observes that Chinese silk is already present, surprisingly, in some of these far markets. Indeed, traders from the nomad realms have been bartering Chinese silk, obtained through earlier raids or minor trade in Central Asia, for a while. This is a revelation. Chinese goods have preceded Zhang Qian, even without direct contact. After a long and arduous journey, Zhang Qian heads back to China. Incredibly, on his return trip, he is captured once more by the Xiangyong and detained. Years pass again. It's almost as if fate is testing his resolve at every turn. Yet eventually he escapes with the help of his Xiongnu wife, according to one story. And finally, around 126 BCE, a much older and wearier Zhang Qian walks back through the gates of Chang'an. Imagine the scene. The court had given him up for dead long ago. Now he appears sunburnt, in rough, travel-worn clothes, accompanied by just a handful of men. Most of his original companions perished or stayed behind during the trials of the trip. He bows before the astonished emperor and lays out exotic gifts, perhaps a handful of alfalfa seeds and grapevine cuttings from Fergana, samples of strange fabrics or spices, maybe an introduction letter from a distant king. Then Zhang Qian recounts his journey, speaking of great civilizations to the west, sophisticated cities and prosperous trading centers as far as the lands of Persia and India. He tells of the heavenly horses of Fergana that could be obtained for Chinese silk or gold. He speaks of a people called the Parthians, who act as middlemen in a place known as Anxi, Parthia, and of a mighty empire even further west, the Romans, though he didn't meet them directly. He also notes that the road to these places is hard but possible. He himself has done it. Zhang Qian's report is like a window suddenly flung open onto a wider world. The emperor and his ministers are delighted and intrigued. Soon, the Han government prepares follow-up missions. Large caravans loaded with silk skeins and bolts, that shimmering, luxuriant fabric that China knows the world craves, are sent westward with the dual aim of securing alliances and trading for those magnificent horses and other goods. This is often marked as the formal opening of the Silk Road. From this point on, regular trade contacts between Han China and Central Asia begin. Picture a line of camels setting off from the frontier, each carrying hundreds of pounds of silk wrapped in protective cover. These caravans are guarded by soldiers, since the routes can be dangerous. They travel from one oasis to the next across the Taklamakan Desert's edges, forging what will become the main arteries of the Silk Road. Now, let's gently follow one of these early Han caravans in our minds. The caravan leaves the Jade Gate, Yumanguan, which is a fortified outpost at the far northwestern limit of Han territory. The Jade Gate, standing lonely amid the desert, gets its name because so much jade from the western mountains passed through it into China. As our caravan files through that gate, it symbolically leaves the familiar world and enters the vast beyond. Immediately, the environment is harsh. Our caravan skirts the fearsome Taklamakan Desert, which stretches out like a great ocean of sand to the south. Instead of plunging straight in, a lethal proposition, as Taklamakan was said to mean go in and you won't come out, they take a safer path, following the string of oases along the desert's rim. By day, the sun beats down mercilessly, and waves of heat distort the horizon. The sand underfoot can burn. The caravan starts moving as early as pre-dawn when the stars are still out and the air is cool. Camels, with their 2 humps and thick woolly coats, handle the cold nights and scorching days better than horses would. They walk in a steady, plodding rhythm, bell necklaces tinkling softly with each step. The men wrap themselves in light robes, covering their heads with cloth against sun and sand. Progress is slow, perhaps 30 li, about 10 miles in a day. Maybe a bit more if they push. By midday they rest. Envision them finding a rare clump of tamarisk trees or a sand dune tall enough to cast a little shadow. They unload the camels briefly to let the animals cool and to ease the pressure of the loads. Everyone shares water, sparingly from goatskin bags. A trader takes out a bit of dried meat and a flatbread for lunch, eating in silence while contemplating the endless dung-coloured landscape. The only sound is the hot wind, occasionally gusting and whistling, trying to dislodge the tents and tarps. Perhaps one of the younger travellers, bored and a bit anxious in the emptiness, asks the leader how much longer until the next well. The leader, an experienced guide hired for this route, squints at the sun's position and replies calmly that by nightfall they should reach the oasis of Dunhuang if all goes well. As evening approaches, the suffocating heat relents. The caravan presses on. Eventually, as dusk falls, a welcome sight appears. In the distance, green patches of vegetation and faint lights, the oasis town of Dunhuang. They have reached a gateway oasis on the Silk Road. Entering Dunhuang is like stumbling upon a small paradise after the desolation of the desert. There are fields of barley and wheat fed by canals of clear water from nearby hills, and groves of willow and poplar trees providing shade. The town itself is enclosed by earthen walls. Inside, there's a lively market quarter where local farmers, traders, and travelers exchange goods. Many languages can be heard here, the local Chinese dialect mixed with tongues of Central Asian merchants. For some of our caravan members, Dunhuang might be the farthest from home they've ever been. Yet reassuringly, they find a Chinese administrative post here, and even a Buddhist temple. That's signs that they haven't left civilization, but rather civilization has extended its arm out this far. The caravan will likely rest in Dunhuang for a few days. They may stay at a caravanserai, an inn built specifically for merchant groups. Within its secure courtyard, the camels are tied and given fresh fodder, maybe some cut reeds or grain, and plenty of water. The merchants unload their cargo into storerooms and then can relax. You can almost feel their relief. After many days of monotony and vigilance in the wild, now they can sit on a cot or carpet, stretch their legs, and have a hot meal prepared for them. Perhaps a bowl of lamb stew with spices and some wine from local grapes. Dunhuang, like several oases, cultivates grapes introduced from the west. At night, some of them wander to the edge of town to visit the famous Magao caves nearby, also known as the Caves of the Thousand Buddhas. Let's quietly step into one of those caves with a few travelers carrying oil lamps. The cave is cool and dark until the lamp's light unveils breathtaking murals on the walls and ceiling. Hundreds of painted Buddhas serenely gaze down, their images illuminated by the gentle flicker of flame. The travelers respectfully whisper prayers or simply stare in awe. These caves were begun by Buddhist monks decades earlier, and over time, merchants have donated money to have them decorated as acts of piety and gratitude for surviving the dangerous road. It's humbling for our caravan members to see scenes of the Buddha's life painted here. Some notice that the art has influences from many cultures. The Buddha figures have an Indian-style face, the robes have folds reminiscent of Greek sculpture, and there are Chinese motifs of clouds and mountains in the background. The Silk Road has already been a conduit not just for trade, but for art styles and religions. Perhaps one merchant who is not a Buddhist still feels a sense of peace here and leaves a small offering, a few coins or a length of silk, as thanks for a safe journey so far and in hopes of protection onward. Outside the cave, the night sky is brilliant with stars. The Milky Way arches overhead like a pale ribbon. The desert around is silent, except for a faint breeze. The travelers, feeling contemplative, return to their inn and drift into much-needed sleep, while their camels noisily munch on fodder in the stable yard. After recuperating in Dunhuang, the caravan pushes on. From here, the trail will split into multiple routes skirting the Taklamakan Desert, a northern route and a southern route. Both eventually lead to the same region on the far side of the desert, but they pass through different oasis towns. I suppose our caravan takes the northern route, which runs via the oases of Hami, Turpan, and Kucha, among others. Each segment is a few days to a week of travel between water sources. In the following days, they traverse a harsh, gravelly plain. The Gobi Desert up here is not all sand dunes. Much of it is pebbles and rock, stretching under a merciless sun. Yet, every so often, these intrepid traders spot telltale signs of an oasis ahead. A faint smear of green on the horizon, which, as they get closer, reveals itself to be clusters of trees, fields, and mud brick dwellings. Life blossoms around water. One such oasis is Turpan, sitting in a depression below sea level, one of the hottest places around. In summer, the heat in Turpan is intense, but fortunately Turpan has ingeniously built underground channels called caravans that funnel cold mountain water into the town, irrigating vineyards and orchards. When our caravan arrives, perhaps at dusk to avoid the peak heat, they are greeted by the sight of grape trellises laden with clusters of green and purple grapes. Local farmers sell sweet raisins and melons to the passing traders, a delightful treat after the bland rations of travel. Imagine biting into a cool slice of melon after weeks of dry bread and salted meat, the juices running down one's chin and the sugar reviving the spirit. For a moment, the difficulties of the road are forgotten in that simple pleasure. In Turpan's market, our travelers encounter merchants from many places. There might be Sogdians from Samarkand, easily recognized by their prominent noses and thick beards, speaking an Iranian tongue and wearing long tunics with colorful belts. There could be Indians from the south, identifiable by their lighter cotton attire and perhaps the religious marks on their foreheads, carrying texts and medicinal herbs. There might even be a few Parthian or Persian traders with their distinctive hats and flowing robes. And of course, local Uyghur or other Turkic people who manage this oasis, bilingual in Chinese and their own language, facilitating deals. The hubbub of bargaining in multiple languages fills the warm evening air. Even though the tongues differ, numbers and the haggling process have a universal character. Our Chinese merchant uses broken Sogdian words he's learned to negotiate the price of a hardy Bactrian camel from a Sogdian dealer, while another of his companions trades a bolt of silk for several bags of dried grapes and a sack of copper coins minted in Persia. After Turpan, the caravan continues northwest, winding through terrain that gradually rises toward the Tian Shan Mountains, the Heavenly Mountains. They reach the oasis of Kashgar at the western edge of the Taklamakan Desert. Kashgar is a pivotal junction, one of the great crossroads of the Silk Road. Located at the foot of high peaks, it is the meeting point of routes coming from the east, like ours, and those coming down from the north, from the Fergana Valley, or south, from India over the Karakoram Mountains. Arriving in Kashgar is an experience. It's larger and busier than many places they've passed, a true caravan city. Let's pause in Kashgar to absorb the scene. It's market day in the main square. The smell of fresh baked bread wafts from an open-air oven where a local Uyghur baker is slapping rounds of dough onto the hot clay walls of the tandir oven. Golden, crusty naan breads speckled with sesame seeds are pulled out and sold to hungry travelers. Just nearby, there's a bustling livestock market. One can hear the bleating of fat-tailed sheep and the lowing of cattle. Traders are examining horses, feeling their flanks and checking teeth before haggling. Camels, too, are lined up, grumbling and occasionally bellowing. A few attempt to bite when strangers get too close. The variety of people is even greater here than in Turpan. Chinese officials in neat silk robes, keeping an eye on things. Turkic herders in fur-limbed coats, bartering for knives and cloth. Persian merchants with ledgers tucked under their arms, negotiating prices for large purchases. Indian Buddhist monks in ochre robes on their way to Turpan or Kucha to obtain scriptures, and perhaps even a Roman or Syrian merchant or two, adventurous souls who have come all the way east, speaking a bit of Persian or Sogdian to get by. In the crowd, you might also notice women participating. Local women run food stalls selling spiced lentil soup and grilled meats to travelers. Others weave and dye fabrics to sell. A few are there as part of merchant families, helping their fathers or husbands with accounting and trade deals. Life in Kashgar revolves around trade, and everyone has a role in this cosmopolitan dance. Our caravan's goods are of great interest in Kashgar. Chinese silk, in particular, is like a celebrity arrival. We can imagine bolts of fine silk being unfurled in a trader's stall, the fabric catching the light with that inimitable sheen. Persian and Indian traders run their fingers over it, admiring the tight weave and lustrous quality. Even at high asking prices, they are eager to buy, knowing that in their home markets, further west, this silk will fetch an even more princely sum, perhaps to be made into elegant garments for a Persian noble or a rich Roman lady. One bolt of top-grade silk might be exchanged for several strong horses or for a bag of valuable gemstones. Such is the demand. And along with silk, the Chinese have brought lacquerware, fine porcelain, if this is later centuries, early on. True porcelain was not yet common, but by the Tang era it certainly was. And paper. Many Western merchants are fascinated by Chinese paper. A smooth, light material, much easier to write on than the parchment or papyrus used in the West. There's a story circulating among the traders about how paper is made from mulberry bark and hemp fibers. Some Persian scholars traveling with the caravan take bundles of paper to bring back for experiments, unknowingly poised to spark a revolution in writing materials once the technique spreads. Indeed, a historical note, by the mid-8th century, papermaking would be established in Samarkand, and from there it would spread west, but that's a little ahead of where we are now. After exchanging goods and refitting in Kashgar, our caravan must decide its next direction. The Silk Road routes from here fan out towards the west and south. One branch goes west over the Pamir Mountains towards Samarkand and the heart of Central Asia. Another veers southwest toward the upper Indus Valley into the Indian subcontinent. The traders we've been following are mostly interested in reaching the wealthy cities of Central Asia and perhaps eventually the markets of Persia or even the fringes of the Roman Empire. So they prepare to cross one of the highest mountain ranges in the world, the Pamirs, sometimes known as the roof of the world. The journey up into the Pamirs is arduous and breathtaking. The trail becomes a narrow zigzag carved into mountainsides. The air grows thinner with each step up. The camels, so suited to desert, struggle a bit on steep icy paths. Yaks or hardy mountain ponies are sometimes hired from local highlanders to help carry loads through this section. The travelers wrap themselves in thick wool cloaks against the sudden cold. Below them, sheer drops fall away to misty valleys. Above them, peaks with eternal snow glint in the sunlight. They ascend one slow switchback after another. At night they camp on a ledge, sheltered from the wind. The stars seem startlingly close and bright in the thin atmosphere. Many of the men feel the altitude in their bodies, slight dizziness or headaches. They chew on garlic or other local remedies that mountain folk recommend to ease the symptoms. Huddled around a small crackling fire of dried yak dung, there's no wood at these heights, they warm their hands and share stories to distract from the biting cold. Perhaps one old Sogdian guide tells a half legend about these mountains, of valleys up here where strange demons live, or of an alpine lake where if you shout, the spirits of the lake cause avalanches in reply. In whispers, they remind each other to move quietly tomorrow and not to cause too much noise. Half believing, half skeptical, the travelers listen, the firelight dancing on their faces. Above the Milky Way is a dazzling river of white, the same band of stars the Chinese call the Silver River and people in the West call the Road of Milk, a cosmic silk road connecting distant stars. There is a profound silence, punctuated only by the occasional fall of a distant piece of ice or rock, echoing in the ravines. Finally, cresting a high pass, our caravan looks down on a new world. They've crossed the barrier dividing east from west. Ahead lies the fertile valley of the Oxus River, Amu Darya, and beyond that, the great plateau of Persia. They descend into the region of Sogdiana, known for its rich cities like Samarkand and Bukhara. Let's arrive now at Samarkand, one of the jewels of the Silk Road. In the time our caravan arrives, let's say around the 1st century CE, or perhaps a little later, Samarkand is the capital of the Sogdian people, an Iranian people famed for their trading prowess. The city has already existed for centuries. Alexander the Great knew it as Marakanda. It lies in a fertile valley nourished by the Zaravshan River, with wheat fields and vineyards around. As our caravan approaches the city gates, they pass through suburbs where craftsmen are busy at work. They see potters firing distinctive glazed ceramics, jewelers setting turquoise and carnelian stones into gold pieces, and weavers creating patterned rugs. Samarkand, at this time, is not yet Islamic. Islam will come many centuries later. The people here follow diverse faiths. Many Sogdians are Zoroastrian by heritage, worshipping before fire altars. But thanks to the Silk Road, Samarkand is already cosmopolitan. There are Buddhist temples built by traveling monks, there are shrines to local river gods, and even early Christian Nestorian missionaries will later establish a community here. Entering the city, the caravan is greeted by an official market overseer, perhaps a Sogdian noble appointed to help foreign merchants. And he welcomes them in fluent Chinese. Yes, some Sogdians learned Chinese to ease trade, and likewise some Chinese traders learned a bit of Sogdian. Imagine the relief of our Chinese merchant to find someone in this far-off place who can speak his language and explain local customs. The overseer directs them to a caravanserai where they can lodge. Samarkand's streets are a whirl of activity. Bazaars under canvas awnings line the main thoroughfare, with vendors selling fragrant spices from India, cinnamon, cloves and cardamom in open sacks, and others displaying finely woven carpets with geometric patterns. There are stalls of Central Asian paper. Samarkand will become renowned for its paper soon, and of course row upon row of silk and cotton textiles hanging like colourful water. People of many ethnicities bump shoulders here. A Greek merchant from the distant city of Antioch might be here to buy lapis lazuli, the deep blue gemstone from Afghan mines, to send back to Mediterranean jewelers. A Persian dealer might be negotiating for Chinese lacquerware to grace the court of the Shah in Ctesiphon. And Sogdian merchants, perhaps the ancestors or kin of the very person who welcomed our caravan, are busy coordinating deals as they are the masters of this domain. In Samarkand, goods from all compass points meet. Let's take a quiet walk through one market lane and observe. Here, on a blanket, a trader from India has spread out precious stones and ivory carvings. Next to him, a Chinese trader is carefully weighing out packets of fine tea. By the later Silk Road era, tea would travel too, or showing a curious audience how the Chinese use a lodestone compass for navigation, a novelty to others. Across the way, a Sogdian cloth merchant proudly shows off silk brocades that have intricate patterns of lions and grapevines. Interestingly, these patterns were inspired by Persian art, but woven in China and brought here to sell. Truly a fusion product of Silk Road exchange. In the air, one can smell incense burning, likely frankincense from Arabia or myrrh, which have come up via caravan or perhaps via ship through the Persian Gulf and then by land to Samarkand. These resins are as valuable as gold in some places, used for temples and royal ceremonies. Night falls in Samarkand. Our travelers are honored with an invitation to dine at the house of a wealthy Sogdian family. Perhaps the caravan leader knew a cousin of theirs from a past trip, and the connection is hospitality. We step into a spacious courtyard of a richly decorated house. Oil lamps flicker on beautifully painted murals that adorn the walls, showing scenes of feasting and perhaps an exotic hunt. The head of the household is a jolly Sogdian trader with a long beard and twinkling eyes. He regales the guests with stories of his own travels. Perhaps he has been as far as the coast of Syria and can describe the endless sea. Or perhaps he visited the great city of Luoyang in China and can compliment the Chinese chef on the authenticity of tonight's noodles. Yes, noodles are served. Wheat noodles are actually a staple in this part of Central Asia and in China alike, a shared culinary thread. They also serve roasted lamb, seasoned with cumin, a spice native to this region and beloved along the Silk Road. Chinese cooks will adopt cumin for lamb dishes from Central Asian influence. They drink a light grape wine that Samarkand is famous for. Central Asian wine was known in China, and indeed the Han Chinese greatly desired the Western fermented grape juice that Zhang Qian spoke of, having mostly had grain wines at home. The meal is merry, but also poignant, and around the table sit people of different cultures, communicating through bits of each other's languages and mostly through the universal language of laughter, goodwill, and shared food. This kind of evening has played out countless times thanks to the Silk Road, strangers becoming friends, learning from each other quietly in the lamplight. As we leave Samarkand in our narrative journey, let's reflect. Our initial Chinese caravan has fulfilled its mission of reaching the heart of Central Asia. Some members might go further, all the way to Persia, or even attempt to reach Rome's eastern provinces to trade. In fact, over the decades and centuries to come, there will be known cases of Chinese goods making it to Roman lands and Roman envoys or merchants coming east. Roman coins from the early centuries CE have been found in Vietnam and along trade routes in China, and conversely, Chinese silk became well known in Rome by the time of the early emperors. The Romans were absolutely enchanted with silk. They called it sericum, deriving from ceres, their word for the land of silk, essentially China. Roman ladies wore diaphanous silk gowns that were considered shockingly revealing by elder statesmen. Some Roman writers like Pliny the Elder and Seneca the Younger complained that the demand for silk was draining Rome's coffers of gold and silver because silk was so expensive and had to be imported from such distant lands. This complaint in the Roman Senate is a first century echo of globalization. Even then, luxury fashion had created a trade imbalance. The Romans didn't know exactly how silk was made. They only knew it came from the mysterious East via Parthian middlemen who kept the source secret. Some fanciful guesses were that silk grew on trees or was combed from some exotic oriental flower. The secret, of course, was that silk is spun by silkworms that feed on mulberry leaves, a carefully guarded Chinese secret for millennia. But knowledge, like goods, has a way of traveling. In the mid-6th century CE, a legendary incident occurred that illustrates how even the most guarded secrets can slip along the Silk Road. It's said that 2 Christian monks who spent time in China managed to smuggle silkworm eggs and mulberry seeds out of China by hiding them inside their hollow bamboo walking staffs. These monks traveled back west and presented their contraband to the Byzantine emperor in Constantinople. The Byzantines were thus able to start their own silk production, breaking the Chinese monopoly. While the story may have been embellished, it's generally accepted that by around year 550, the knowledge of silk cultivation reached the Byzantine Empire in this sneaky way. Soon, silk workshops in the Mediterranean began churning out silk textiles. However, even with local production, the demand for high-quality Chinese silk remained strong. The Byzantine and later Islamic worlds still prized the finest grades of silk from China and continued importing them. This tale of the monks and the silkworms is a reminder that the Silk Road carried not just commodities but also ideas and technologies, often quietly and unseen. By now we've accompanied our imaginary caravan and its goods from China to the heart of Central Asia. Historically, silk and other goods would continue west in stages, often exchanged from one trader to the next, rather than one person going the whole way. Few individuals traversed the entire length of the Silk Road themselves. Most journeys were like relay races. For instance, a Chinese merchant might sell his silk in Samarkand to a Sogdian, who would then carry it to Persia and sell it to a Persian merchant, who might then take it to the ports of the Eastern Mediterranean, where a Greek or Syriac trader would buy it and sail with it to Rome or Alexandria. In this way, things traveled much farther than the people who originally packed them. Yet, there are remarkable accounts of long-distance travelers who did go from one end of the world to the other. And not all of them were traders. Many were pilgrims or monks, driven by faith and curiosity. Starting around the 1st century CE, a great new spiritual pathway overlapped the Silk Road, the path of Buddhism from India to China. One early traveler was a man named Faxian, a Chinese Buddhist monk in the 5th century CE. Faxian was determined to find authentic Buddhist scriptures in India and bring them back to China for proper translation and dissemination. In a time when travel was even more perilous than in Jiang Qian's day, Faxian walked from China across the deserts and mountains to India. Around year 399 he braved the icy passes of the Pamirs and the fierce sands of the Taklamakan, very much like our caravan did, but with far fewer resources, just a small band of fellow monks and an abundance of devotion. Faxian reached India, studied at the famous Buddhist University of Nalanda, and visited the holy sites of the Buddha's life. Years later, he returned to China, not by retracing the overland route, but by sailing from Sri Lanka through dangerous ocean voyages back to eastern China. He brought with him precious Sanskrit manuscripts, which he then spent the rest of his life translating. The journey of Faxian is but one example. Later, in the 7th century, an even more celebrated monk, Xuanzang, would make a similar pilgrimage to India and return with hundreds of texts dramatically influencing Chinese Buddhism. Xuanzang's story was later romanticized in the famous Chinese novel Journey to the West, as you imagine these scholarly, gentle souls trudging through barren lands and foreign cities, seeking wisdom rather than wealth. You can sense another layer of the Silk Road's significance. It was a conduit for ideas, for the spread of religions and philosophies. Buddhism flowed into China and East Asia via the Silk Road, largely because of such pilgrims and because of the communities along the way that embraced the Dharma and built monasteries and cave temples like those at Dunhuang and along the Tarim Basin. With Buddhism came art styles. We spoke of murals blending Greek, Persian, and Indian elements, and even music and language influences. Nor was Buddhism the only faith to move along these routes. The Silk Road was like a great conversation of religions. By the early centuries CE, Zoroastrianism, the ancient religion of Persia and China among the expatriate communities, Manichaeism, a faith born in Mesopotamia, found converts among some of the Silk Road populace. The Uyghur Turks, for a time in the 8th century, adopted Manichaeism as a state religion, until they later converted to Buddhism and then Islam. Christianity too made an appearance. The Church of the East, often called Nestorian Christianity, sent missionaries along the trade routes. In 635 CE, during the Tang dynasty, a Christian monk named Alapan arrived in Chang'an and was welcomed by the Chinese emperor. The faith he brought was called Jingjiao, the luminous religion, in China, and it took root modestly, mainly among foreign communities. An inscription from 781 CE, found in Xi'an, the Nestorian stele, records 150 years of Christian presence, describing churches established in several Chinese cities. So, if you walked the streets of cosmopolitan Chang'an in the 8th century, you might find, tucked in a side alley of the Western Market District, a small Christian church with Syriac prayers being chanted, and a few blocks away, a fire temple where Persian Zoroastrians kept their sacred flame burning, and around the corner, a Buddhist pagoda rising above the roofs, built to house scriptures a monk brought from India. The Tang capital was truly a microcosm of the Silk Road's diversity at its height. One can imagine an evening in a Chang'an tavern around that time, merchants from far lands exchanging toasts. A Chinese silk trader sits with a Sogdian wine merchant and an Arab emissary from the Caliphate. They communicate in a mix of broken languages and hand gestures. The Sogdian teaches the Chinese a few words in Persian, while the Arab learns a drinking song in Sogdian. Laughter bridges the gaps between them. These fleeting friendships were the human side of commerce and diplomacy. Of course, not everything was idyllic. The Silk Road traversed lands that were often dangerous and politically unstable. Let's talk softly about some of the challenges travelers faced, even as they bravely pushed forward. We've already mentioned the brutal climates, scorching deserts where water is life and death, and high frozen passes where a single misstep could send one tumbling into an abyss, or where blizzards could blind and bury entire caravans. Travelers learned to be resourceful and respectful of nature's power. Caravans would set out at night or pre-dawn to avoid midday heat in the desert. Guides knew how to find buried water caches at certain intervals, or which desert shrubs indicated water not far below ground. In the mountains, they learnt to move only during stable weather windows and to watch for signs of avalanche. For instance, in some places along the Pamir and Tian Shan routes, it was said you should not shout or make loud noises for fear of triggering a slide, a belief mingling caution with a bit of superstition. We can imagine a group of traders carefully leading pack animals across a narrow ridge, each man spaced out and treading softly, the bell on the lead camel even muffled with cloth, all holding their breath as they pass under a slope heavy with snow. Only when they reach safer ground do they exhale and resume their normal banter. Then there were bandits, the human threat. The wealth moving along the Silk Road was tempting to robbers and raiders. Some stretches, especially those outside the control of strong states, were notorious for brigands. Caravans coped by traveling in larger numbers and, when possible, hiring armed guards, or even negotiating protection from local nomadic tribes. It was common for caravans to pay tolls or tribute to the chieftains of regions they passed through, essentially buying safe passage. While it might feel like extortion, it was a practical way to avoid violence. In many cases, those very nomads who might otherwise raid the caravan would become its protectors for a fee, escorting it to the next jurisdiction. The presence of strong empires drastically reduced such dangers. During the heights of the Han, Tang, or Mongol empires, banditry was suppressed with an iron hand. No one dared rob a caravan under the Khan's protection, for the punishment by the Mongol law was severe and swift. But in times of anarchy, merchants had to fend for themselves or turn back. We should remember in our gentle journey that for the real traders of old, courage and calculated risk were constant companions. Illness was another shadow on the road. We touched on altitude sickness that could afflict travelers in the high Pamirs. There were also more mundane threats, contaminated water causing dysentery, or unfamiliar foods upsetting stomachs. In an age long before antibiotics or understanding of germs, a simple fever could turn fatal. Caravans included people who had picked up medical lore from various cultures, perhaps a bit of Greek humoral theory via Persian texts, mixed with Indian Ayurveda and Chinese herbal knowledge. If someone fell sick, they might treat them with a mixture of herbs carried for that purpose or consult a local healer at the next stop. Often, rest and clean water were the only remedies available. Sometimes, a traveler had to be left behind at an oasis to recover, or in the worst case, buried in the foreign soil beside the road. Little graveyards of strangers dot the Silk Road's length. Syrians in the Taklamakan, Chinese in the steppes of Kazakhstan, unknown souls who never made it home but whose resting places became part of the story of the road. One of the most dramatic examples of disease riding the Silk Road is the outbreak of the Black Death in the 14th century. Historical evidence suggests that the bubonic plague that devastated Europe in the 1340 s originated somewhere in Central Asia. It likely spread along trade routes, carried by flea-infested rats in caravan goods or by people in whom the infection was incubating. The Mongol Empire's vast network inadvertently facilitated the rapid transmission of the plague. By 1346, the disease reached the trading ports of the Black Sea, and from there it traveled on ships to the Mediterranean, unleashing the Black Death in Europe, where it killed perhaps a third of the population. In our context tonight, we reflect on that somber note quietly. The Silk Road not only spread wisdom and wealth, but also, at times, catastrophe. In the 14th century, as plague ravaged societies, the movement of people and goods contracted sharply. For a while, fear closed cities and sealed roads. It was one of the factors that led to the decline of the overland trade network. But let's not dwell on the darkness too much. It is part of the story, yes, reminding us that global connections can spread both good and ill. But humanity learned and moved forward. After that tragic interruption, the Silk Road revived somewhat in the late 14th and early 15th centuries, though it was never quite the same. A conqueror named Timur, known also as Tamerlane, arose in Central Asia and established a new empire with Samarkand as its capital. Timur loved art and culture when not busy waging war, and he gathered artisans from all over into Samarkand, aiming to make it the most splendid city of the world. He built magnificent blue tile mosques and mausoleums that glowed like jewels. Under Timur and his successors, there was a brief renaissance of Silk Road trade through Central Asia, mainly because his empire created a zone of stability, though gained by brutal means. Caravans once again carried Chinese silks, Indian spices, and Russian furs into Samarkand and beyond. Timur, like Genghis Khan earlier, also reopened pathways for envoys. He even sent gifts to the Ming dynasty in China and received embassies in return. But even the greatest of conquerors age and pass. After Timur's death, his empire fragmented. Meanwhile, on the western end, the rising power of the Ottoman Empire eventually captured Constantinople, Istanbul, in 1453, and with that it controlled many traditional western termini of the Silk Road. The Ottomans and other Turkic groups in Persia imposed their own heavy taxes on caravans. From the European perspective, the land route to the riches of the East was now politically and financially more difficult. So what did the Europeans do? They looked to the sea. Here, at the very end of the medieval Silk Road era, another journey begins, the age of exploration. European mariners, partly motivated by the desire to find direct access to Asian spices and silk without passing through middlemen, set sail into the unknown ocean. In 1498, Vasco da Gama, the Portuguese navigator, succeeded in reaching India by sea, circling around Africa. Not long after, European ships made direct contact with the Spice Islands, Indonesia, China, and eventually Japan. These sea routes could carry far greater quantities of goods and more quickly with fewer losses than the arduous camel caravans. Over the 1500s and 1600s, maritime trade largely eclipsed the old overland routes. The Silk Road slowly quieted. The ancient roads were still there, and local trade certainly continued. Caravans still crossed parts of Central Asia to trade tea and horses and carpets, especially within the empires that now dominated those lands. For example, the caravan trade between China and Russia in the 17th and 18th centuries was significant, bringing Chinese tea to Russian markets via camel caravan, an echo of the old Silk Road, continuing in a narrower form. But the days of massive east-west caravans carrying silk to Rome or spices to Chang'an, were mostly over by the 16th century. Imagine one of the last great caravans in the early 1500s setting off from Kashgar. Perhaps it's carrying a load of fine porcelain and silk. But when it reaches the trading hubs in Persia, it finds fewer takers than before, because now Portuguese and Venetian ships are unloading similar cargo directly at Red Sea or Mediterranean ports, flooding the market. Over time, the big trans-Asian caravans become fewer and smaller. One by one, the caravanserais along the route fall into disuse. Some turn into ruins, their courtyards visited only by passing nomads or curious locals. The sands of the desert slowly reclaim stretches of the road that once felt the tread of countless feet and hooves. By the 18th and 19th centuries, scholars and adventurers from Europe start romanticizing this bygone era. They call it the Silk Road, a term popularized in the 19th century. The German geographer Baron von Richthofen famously coined Seidenstraße, Silk Road, in 1877. By then, the world had changed. Maritime trade and new industrial powers ruled, and the Silk Road existed more in old chronicles and as faint trails used by local traders or pilgrims. But the mystique of it captured the imagination. People thought of the Silk Road as caravans of rich silks and spices crossing trackless wastes, of Marco Polo traveling to meet the Great Khan, of exotic cities shimmering mirage-like in the desert. We're fortunate in our modern times that much historical and archaeological work has uncovered the real story behind that romantic image. Ancient letters, like the one from the Sogdian woman Miune found near Dunhuang, give us voices of real individuals from those times. Ruins of trading towns along the route have yielded up everyday items, a child's toy, a contract written on silk or paper, a faded wall painting that speak to daily life on the Silk Road. We know now that the Silk Road was not even primarily about silk. By volume, many other goods traveled those roads, humble commodities like salt, grain, and leather, which might not sound glamorous but were crucial. Ideas and inventions arguably were the most world-changing cargoes. Think of paper and printing, gunpowder and the compass, all Chinese innovations that eventually made their way west, transforming the Middle East and Europe. Or consider that the concept of zero and certain astronomical knowledge traveled from India and the Islamic world into China, enriching its science. The Silk Road's legacy is all around us. Take a moment to appreciate some subtler examples. The fruit you might eat, say an apricot or a peach, these were spread via the Silk Road. The apricot originated in China and traveled west to Armenia and Europe, so much so that the Romans called it Armeniacum, thinking it came from Armenia. So the grape, conversely, was unknown in early China until Zhang Qian brought grape seeds. Now wine is produced in China too. Our languages carry relics of the Silk Road. The English word sugar comes from Sanskrit via Arabic, reflecting how sugarcane technology spread from India westward. Silk comes from an old Greek word serikos, meaning Chinese, essentially. In Persian, the word for china, porcelain, is chini, showing that they remember the origin of fine ceramics, the spread of religions we discussed. Without the Silk Road, East and West religions might have remained far more isolated. For instance, Buddhism might not have reached China when it did, altering the course of East Asian history. Islam might not have found its way to the Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples in the far east of the Muslim world. Christianity would likely never have had a presence in medieval China at all. Art and music also bear Silk Road imprints. Some musical instruments in Japan, like the shu, which is a kind of mouth organ, trace origins to Southeast Asia and ultimately to Central Asia. The beloved lute likely came to Europe via the Middle East from Central Asian origins. The word lute itself comes from Arabic al-ud, but the idea of a short-necked, plucked instrument is very old. In Central Asia and China, in painting and motifs, you can find identical patterns of the pearl-shaped roundel, a motif of Central Asian origin, on textiles found in China, in mosaics in Byzantium, and in wall paintings of Samarkand. A tangible thread of shared aesthetic, and beyond the material, there's a spirit to the Silk Road that lingers, the spirit of curiosity and openness. For all the tales of war and hardship, there are as many tales of hospitality and cooperation. A Chinese monk arriving in Taxila, northwest India, might have been hosted kindly by local Buddhists and given manuscripts to take home. A Syrian merchant visiting Merv in Turkmenistan might have learned to eat with chopsticks at a Chinese trader's home while teaching his host a new method to calculate profits using Greek-style arithmetic. Cultures didn't just clash. Far more often, they blended and learned from one another. Now, dear listener, we slowly reach the conclusion of our long journey across the Silk Road. It's time to leave the bustling markets and high passes and return to the quiet of our own room. To do so, let's imagine one last scene, perhaps the most peaceful one yet. Visualize a small caravan somewhere in the central steppe on a clear night during the height of the Silk Road's glory. The caravan has stopped in a sheltered hollow beside a gently flowing stream. The camels are arranged in a circle for safety, and most of the travelers are asleep by the dying embers of the campfire. One merchant remains awake, sitting wrapped in his cloak, gazing up at the night sky. There is a stillness all around, only the sound of the stream's water and an occasional camel snorting in its sleep. Our merchant might be thinking of home, or perhaps he's marveling at how the same stars guide him and also guide sailors on faraway seas and other caravans he will never see. In the profound silence of the steppe, under a dome of brilliant stars, it's easy to feel the unity of the world. East and west are not so far apart as they might seem. The same moonlight silvering the dunes here is also touching the roofs of distant cities 1,000 miles away. The merchant smiles, feeling at once very small and yet part of something immense and eternal. He adds a few twigs to the fire and lies down. The flames cast a gentle glow on an assortment of objects by the fire. A Roman glass bead, a Chinese bronze mirror, a book of Indian prayers, a Persian copper coin, trinkets from different lands that somehow have all found themselves together in this spot, around this single caravan. It's like a little metaphor for the Silk Road itself. As the merchant closes his eyes, he hears a faint sound carried by the breeze. Perhaps it's the strains of a flute from a fellow traveler dreaming of his home, or maybe just the wind through distant poplar trees. To him, it sounds like a lullaby from all the cultures of the world blended into one gentle tune. He lets that sound lull him into sleep, trusting that tomorrow will bring new adventures and eventually the fulfillment of his journey. Here, with that same trust and calm, you too can drift into sleep. You've journeyed in your imagination from the great walls of Chang'an to the gates of Samarkand and beyond. You've seen caravan lamps dancing in the desert night and heard echoes of camel bells across centuries. The world of the Silk Road, though far in time and distance, has welcomed you and shown you its wonders. Quietly, now it's time to rest and let those images soften and fade like a caravan disappearing over the horizon at dusk. Feel the comfort of your bed, as safe and secure as a caravanserai after a long day's travel. Let your breathing be slow and steady, like the plod-plod of camels in a calm rhythm. In your mind's eye, you can still see the stars over the desert, and the soft glow of embers hold that gentle scene, as long as it pleases you. You feel him? Hey? Oh, there is no more need to stay awake. You've arrived at the end of this journey, and it has been my pleasure to guide you. But the real story of the Silk Road is not just one of trade, but of connection. A reminder that even in antiquity, humans reached out to one another across formidable barriers to share goods, ideas, and kindness. In a way, as you fall asleep, you are connected to that legacy of shared humanity. We all dream under the same sky, after all. So good night, dear traveler. May your dreams carry you softly along ancient pathways to places of wonder and peace. Thank you for listening and allowing me to accompany you on this gentle journey across the ancient world. Sleep well and farewell until next time. Good night.